Good day everyone, this is Jaya Rado together with Miss Vanessa Galula, and we will report the Evolutionary Theory of Personality by David Boss. David Boss is one of the founders of the field of evolutionary psychology. His primary research focus is on strategies of human mating. He is well known for studies on mate selection, tactics on mate attraction, infidelity, and tactics of mate retention. David Boss says evolutionary psychology is not a distinct branch of psychology, but rather a theoretical lens that is currently informing all branches of psychology based on a series of logically consistent and well-informed premises that evolutionary process have not only affected the body but also the brain and psychological mechanisms and the behavior it produces. So before we discuss about the evolutionary theory of personality, we will know first who is David Boss. So David Boss was born on April 14, 1953 in Indianapolis, Indiana to Arnold H. Boss Sr. and Edith Nolte. David Boss earned his PhD in psychology in 1981 at the University of California, Berkeley. He has taught at Berkeley, Harvard University, the University of Michigan, and the University of Texas. And he is currently Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas. Boss is the author of a number of publications and books in the field of evolutionary psychology. The evolutionary process, or natural and sexual selection and chance, results in three distinct outcomes: adaptations, byproducts, and noise. Adaptations are the main product of natural selection. Some known human adaptations are a taste for sweet and fatty foods, the drive to defend close relatives, and preferences for specific mates, especially those that are healthy. Byproducts: sometimes, the evolutionary process produces things that are not adaptations but are considered byproducts. Think of a light bulb. It's designed to produce light, and that is its function. But it also may produce heat because it's an incidental byproduct of the design. In the same way, human adaptations can have incidental byproducts that are not really adaptations to the environment. The human nose, for example, is designed for smelling. But the fact that we can use our nose to hold up our glasses is a byproduct. Noise is a third product of the evolutionary process. This is random variation that is neutral with respect to selection. Going back to the light bulb example, minor variations in the surface texture of the light bulb that do not affect the function of the light bulb are considered noise. So neutral variations in the gene pool introduced through mutations may be passed down through generations but don't affect the adaptive ability, and they are considered noise. The field of evolutionary personality psychology itself has been divided by psychologists arguing for two solutions. Personality differences were either noise or they were perhaps byproducts of evolved adaptive strategies. More recently, however, other theorists have made the case for personality traits being something more than noise or byproducts, namely adaptations. David Boss was the first and most prominent theorist to take up the cause of developing an evolutionary theory of personality. The essence of Boss' theory revolves around adaptive problems and their solutions or mechanisms with the foundational understanding of the nature and nurture of personality. Evolutionary theory of personality. Human nature is a product of evolutionary process. Psychological mechanisms that are successful in helping humans survive and reproduce out-replicate those that are less successful. Over evolutionary time, successful mechanisms spread throughout the population and come to characterize all humans. And some examples of evolutionary analysis at the level of human nature are the need to belong and universal emotions. Let's look at how evolutionary analysis helps us to understand the need to belong. Psychologists have long said that we are social creatures, and evolutionary psychologists provide an explanation. One of the most important social problems early humans had to solve was in order to survive was to establish cooperative relationships with other members of their group. Humans evolved to live in groups. It is proposed that humans have evolved psychological mechanisms to prevent being excluded. This is considered the origin and function of social anxiety, defined as distress or worry about being negatively evaluated in social situations. Consequently, an individual who is shunned by a group will feel. Universal emotions is another area looked at by evolutionary psychologists. Universality is considered crucial for adaptation. In a cross-cultural study, pictures of several faces were shown to subjects in Japan, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and US. All showed tremendous agreement on which emotions were being expressed by each face. In the ancient environment, being able to recognize emotions in others is seen as adaptive in that one could quickly recognize the intent of strangers and protect offspring or a tribe from malicious intruders. Bass has suggested that emotions have evolved to solve a much wider range of adaptive problems. This diverse range includes sexual consummation, mate competition, mate retention, hierarchy negotiation, kin protection, and food acquisition. The evolutionary theory of personality has some additional premises that we need to discuss. Adaptations are presumed to be domain specific in that they are designed to solve a particular adaptive problem. Consider the problem of food selection, choosing the right foods to eat. The general rule long ago was eat the first thing you could find. And that's very maladaptive because you wouldn't necessarily eat the things that are with survival. Under domain specificity, we have evolved to prefer rich fat and evolved a sweet tooth, as sugar gives us energy. But taste preferences don't necessarily guide us towards successful mate selection, and that requires some different mechanisms. Numerousness means we have many adaptive mechanisms. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that the human mind has a large number of mechanisms. For example, common fears and phobias. The fear of snakes, heights, and darkness, because they threaten survival. Functionality is the idea that our psychological mechanisms are designed to accomplish particular adaptive goals. If you were a medical researcher studying the liver, for example, you wouldn't get very far if you didn't understand the various functions of the liver. Just like we can't understand our preferences for certain mates without understanding the function of these preferences. Looking for the function, it helps us to see the specific adaptive problem that evolved mechanisms solved. So now let's talk about a common misunderstanding in evolutionary theory. Evolution is all about the body changing due to changes in the environment. Evolution occurs from the interaction between adaptation and input from the environment that triggers the adaptations. The discovery of epigenetics is an even more powerful example of how genetic influence is not set in stone at the moment of conception
and interacts with input from the environment. So, what is epigenetics? Epigenetics is a change in gene function that does not involve changes in DNA. The evolutionary model of personality cannot be tested directly in as far as we cannot conduct studies over hundreds of generations. And yet, just like in biology, there is much support for the evolutionary basis of human personality, which can be divided into at least three general topics: temperament, genetics, and animal studies. All three lines of evidence support the view that personality has a biological basis and that these biological evidence have evolved. The animal personality research is interesting. Evidence has been found that animals may possess the personality traits from Macrae and Costes, Big Five. Critic of evolutionary theory. As a critic, evolutionary psychology in general and evolutionary personality theory in particular have stimulated a lot of controversy, but also a relatively large body of empirical research. In general, it is difficult to falsify because evolution takes thousands of years to observe. Many does it offers post hoc explanation and plausible stories. Others say it does well as it generates novel prediction and explanation. It rates high on organizing knowledge as a guide for practitioners. Though it rates low, it rates moderate on internal consistency and high on parsimony. The concept of humanity. When looking at this theory's concept of humanity, it is also difficult to say on which side of the optimism or pessimism debate it would fall. It is mostly descriptive. Evolutionary psychology has a complex view on the question of determinism versus free will. A common assumption of evolutionary theory by its critics is that it is harshly deterministic and that explains behavior in terms of an evolved past and genetic influence. Indeed, evolutionary psychology is often criticized for condoning traditional sex roles. For example, women being attracted to high status men and men being attracted to physically attractive women. Buss and other evolutionary theorists make clear, however, that evolutionary psychology is a theory of how these traits began, not how they should be. On the question of causality versus teleology, it is clear that the theory comes down heavily on the causality side of the equation. Evolutionary theory sides more with the unconscious influences on thought, behavior, and personality than unconscious ones. The concept of humanity that will be most surprising to many people will be evolutionary psychology's stance on biological versus social influence. Clearly, there is a strong emphasis on biological influences from brain systems, neurochemicals, and genetics. But evolutionary theory is also balanced on the question of the uniqueness of the individual compared to general commonality among all people. Remember, it is about nature and nurture. Thank you all for listening and hoping that you gain some knowledge from this report. God bless us all.
This is our references.